Fuck him. Who were all these people roaming the world trying to kill him? His own father had tried while he was still in his mother's stomach, but he'd lived. And he had lived this last year dodging a woman who came every month to kill him. And he had just lain like this, with his arm over his eyes, wide open to whatever she had in her hand. He'd lived through that too. Hold on, it gets even better. Then a witch had stepped out of his childhood nightmares to grab him, and he'd lived through that. Some bats had driven him out of a cave, and he'd lived through that. And at no time did he have a weapon. Now he walked into a store and asked if somebody could fix his car, and a man pulled a knife on him. And he still wasn't dead. And now what did these Neanderthals think they were going to do? Fuck 'em. My name's Macon. I'm already dead. If that quote doesn't clue you in to the intensity of this book, then I don't know what will. What's up guys, it's the host, you're watching The Gray Medium, and today I'm going to be discussing Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. And if you're new to The Gray Medium, this is the channel where I'm trying to find the balance between black and white, or in my case, gray. What that means to me is trying to find the balance between mind and body. So regardless of if I'm in the library reading books, or if I'm in the gym lifting weights, I'm always trying to improve upon my mind or my body in one way or another. If you're interested in watching some more academic content, I'll make sure to link another book discussion right here. And if you're interested in watching some athletic content, I'll make sure to lift an athletic related video here. Both videos will be available in the description down below. And I want to start off by saying that this book, just like jazz, can't really be done justice by a single YouTube video. Similar to what I did on my video for Toni Morrison's Jazz, I'm really just going to pull a single point and some really small details from the text that I enjoyed, and I'm just going to talk about those, and I'm just going to touch up on those. But if you do want to really get a better grasp of this book in its entirety, you're really just going to have to read it for yourself. Toni Morrison has such a great way of telling stories in a non-linear way and telling stories in such a psychoanalytic way. Even if I were to make multiple videos spanning multiple hours, I don't think I would ever really get to do Toni Morrison's writing justice on YouTube. So I'm just going to zero in on the things that I really liked in Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. The first thing that really stood out to me in Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon was the way that she approached family dynamics and generational trauma. This book, Song of Solomon, similar to Jazz, is really driven ahead not by characters actually completing tasks and completing actions moving the plot forward, but really more by characters discovering things and learning new information and making a psychoanalytic progression, which then allows you to step into those characters' shoes and to learn as they learn and to grow into the story as they grow into the story. And the story really takes place and it really is propelled forward within the minds of the characters rather than within the world that Toni Morrison is creating. In Song of Solomon in particular, we're following Milkman, and we're following Milkman's growth and his journey of self-discovery, his journey of self-awareness. And the vast majority of what happens in this story, don't get me wrong, there's really eventful things that happen in Milkman's life, but the vast majority of the things that happen in this story are really flashbacks, characters recounting things that happened in the past, or internal dialogue, characters thinking to themselves. And the overwhelmingly large majority of the time, that's Milkman. And I really enjoyed this book for that reason, because as a reader, this allows you to connect to certain attributes that you may recognize are, coexisting not only in Milkman as a fictional character, but within yourself. And then what that allows you to do is that allows you to grow and to learn from Milkman as a character, and it feels really rewarding when you actually get to the end of the book and you recognize the progress that he's made as a character, the progress that he's made as a man. And if you're looking for an example of how certain events or certain experiences that characters have had or experiences that characters have lived through, and you're looking to see how it is that those experiences have shaped those characters and how it is that those past experiences dictate those characters' actions moving forward, a perfect example would be looking at Milkman and even just how he got his name. Milkman was like way too old, and by way too old I mean like 10, 11, 12 years old to be breastfeeding, but ultimately he got caught, or he and his mother got caught when he was actually being breastfed by his mother, and then that became an ongoing joke, an ongoing rumor around his community, around his neighborhood, and everyone started calling him Milkman because he was the 10, 11, 12-year-old, however old he was. I don't think the text specifically states it, but he was way too old to be getting breastfed, and he was getting breastfed, and it was noticed by someone, and then that rumor spread around, and throughout the entire duration of the book, we never actually learn what Milkman's real name is. We never really learn what it is that his true name is, especially considering that his last name, Dead, was wrongfully inherited multiple generations back, and the first name that you could refer to him by, you know, Macon, it really doesn't apply to him just because it was the name of his grandfather and his father. It's not unique to him as a character. So even just trying to understand why it is that the main character is named Milkman takes the first 20 pages or so, 20, 30 pages, and then even just trying to understand that he understands that takes within the book, you know, 15, 20 years, and then it also takes like 150 pages for you to actually get to the point to where he actually understands why he's named Milkman, and he actually finds a way to be at peace with that. But the perfect first example is him eventually recognizing what his name means, why he was named Milkman, and then him eventually battling with it, but sooner or later coming to terms with his name, leaning into it, and seriously not even caring about it for the rest of his life. Something that was a pressing issue that bugged him, you know, in his teens and his 20s, really doesn't bother him by the time he's in his 30s, and that's a perfect example of how it is that we see him not only learn about his past, but also learn from his past. Contrary to the typical slave narrative of, you know, the black characters having to travel from a southern state to a northern state, Milkman is actually subverting that plot point. He's actually subverting that storytelling maneuver. He's actually moving from a northern state to a southern state, but while he's doing this, he's continuing to go around, talk to people, and to go explore these locations that he's been told about in stories in order to learn more about his past, in order to learn more about his ancestors who came before him. And we see that not only is he subverting this expectation of moving from south to north, but he's also moving in a non-linear way, in the way that he's discovering more about the past, and we're actually learning more about Milkman and his family and what went down before this book actually started. So in that regard, the story is really quite non-linear, because through all the flashbacks, through all the stories, through all the things that Milkman is learning, through all the information that he's acquiring as he travels south, we're actually learning more about the past in increasingly further, more distant times of the past, which is really interesting to follow. And it makes it all that much more rewarding to see that Milkman is actually learning how to shape his future based off of his past and based off of his family's past. I can say without a doubt that watching Milkman progress throughout this book was a huge satisfaction, and it's something that I really enjoyed, and I really found it to be brain food. The second major component of Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon that really stood out to me is the way in which the physical journey is really representative allegorically of the mental one. In a book that I discussed earlier this year, Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung, Carl Jung explains how oftentimes in dream imagery, or oftentimes in storytelling, traveling from a physical destination, traveling from point A to point B, is often representative of mentally going from point A to point B, mentally growing and undergoing change. Don't get me wrong, I love a story in which a character is trying to traverse landscape and really, you know, move from point A to point B, but this journey is really representative of the changes that they're making mentally, and having to cover a certain amount of physical distance is really just an opportunity to put obstacles in their path that they will then have to overcome as character development. The perfect example is obviously J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. These hobbits have to leave the comfortability of the Shire in order to go throw some ring in some volcano. But, you know, that's not really the important part. The important part is what the Shire stands for, what the hobbits represent, what the ring represents, and what it means to actually have to get rid of that ring. In that case, it's understanding what those plot points stand for allegorically that really gives the book that much more meaning. Obviously, in the case of Tolkien's writing, I'm not super familiar with those texts, so I can't really speak on that a lot, but in the case of Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, you could see how Milkman is traversing this landscape. He's moving from north to south. he's trying to find his family history, because a big part of him finding his family history is a big part of him finding his identity. There comes a point where he's able to learn from his father and to learn how to not have the greed that his father has. He's also able to learn from his mother and to not respond to his trauma the way that his mother has. There's ways in which he learns from Guitar, and there's ways in which he learns from Pilot's choice to remain anonymous or to remain very secretive in her actions, and how it is that she does that to protect herself and to protect the people she cares about. Point is that throughout overcoming these obstacles, Milkman learns more about the people in his life, and therefore he's able to learn more about himself. And for that reason, I found that Song of Solomon really reminded me of Man and His Symbols in the way that this physical journey is very representative of a mental one. The last thing that really stood out to me with this text was the relationship between Milkman and Guitar. Guitar is a close friend of Milkman's who he grew up with, and who is a pretty pressing character throughout the duration of the novel. His presence directly influences Milkman, and there's a lot of ways in which Toni Morrison is having a very meta conversation about different ideological state apparatuses and how they influence people and how they influence people's courses of action. Milkman and Guitar are good friends, at least to a certain extent. You'd kind of have to read the book to understand that one better. I don't want to give any spoilers, but Milkman and Guitar in a lot of ways are really opposites, and they really disagree and they butt heads on more things than one. When there's different things happening within their community, especially different events involving racism, different events involving hate crimes directed towards black people, you'll recognize that Milkman, especially earlier on in the book, is oftentimes completely ignorant to what's going on, meaning he's completely unaware of what's going on, or he's just completely indifferent to it. He knows what's happening, but he just simply doesn't care. Guitar, on the other hand, is quite the social justice warrior. You know, Guitar is like the extremist version of Jaden Smith when he was on that podcast talking about the socioeconomic state of the world.
Dude, like, oh my God, like, can we talk about like the political and economic state of the world right now?
Guitar is progressive, he's radical, he wants to incite change no matter what it takes, and he wants to, in some cases, take extreme action towards doing what he believes is right, whereas Milkman is just so caught up in his own world, he's trying to, you know, in a very Peterson sense, trying to clean his room, trying to understand himself before he even attempts to make sense of any of the things going on around him. The fact of the matter is that in a lot of ways, both characters are just terrible people. And for that reason, it's really interesting watching what Morrison does, because she allows you to see them coexist to a certain extent, but she also allows you to see how it is that they argue with one another and how it is that they butt heads. And I think this allows us as readers to really recognize the desirable attributes that are in Milkman, because in some ways Milkman's a good dude, the desirable attributes that are in Guitar, because in some ways Guitar is a good dude, and to learn from those and to apply them, whereas we could also look at the non-desirable traits that are in both of them and actively work to avoid those, actively work to acknowledge the harm in demonstrating those traits. I feel like this whole conversation, or this whole dialogue that is shared between Milkman and Guitar throughout the duration of the book, really just allows you to step out of any one lens, step out of any one perspective, and to kind of see two people who have very different worldviews kind of battle it out. And in that sense, I feel like their relationship is very meta, and I feel like it's very representative of two different trains of thought that existed during this time. Slavery has obviously been abolished by this point, but discrimination is still pretty strongly prevalent in their world, and seeing how it is that these different characters approach it is definitely some brain food. And with both of these characters, and with all of these characters in this book really, there's a lot of times in which you're gonna really dislike a character, especially early on. And then the more you learn about that character, it doesn't necessarily justify their actions, but it does allow you to recognize why they are the way they are. We see this really prevalent with Milkman's mom, Milkman's father, Milkman himself, even his aunt Pilot, and obviously Guitar as well. The more you read, the more you understand these characters, and the more you understand why they are the way they are. That being said, Song of Solomon is a pretty difficult book to talk about. Giving you quotes without the context of what they're happening within just wouldn't really do you guys any justice. It wouldn't do the book any justice either. So I'm really just going to have to encourage you to go ahead and read this one on your own. I loved it. It's definitely in my top 10 books of all time. I think it's probably in my top 5 even. That being said, I'm going to make sure to include, like I said, another mind and body video. I recognized earlier that I got those colors switched, but whatever. mind should be on this side, body should be on this one. But anyways, I will go ahead and include another mind and body video. Both of those will be linked in the description down below if you're interested in checking those out. And I will also be linking the video that I make on Toni Morrison's jazz. I happened to read these two books simultaneously. They were both assigned readings for courses that I was taking at the same time. So I'm going to make sure to plug the jazz video here, and then I'll also make sure to plug the Song of Solomon video on the jazz video as well. That being said, I greatly appreciate you if you've made it this far. Leave a comment down below to start a discussion, like if you enjoyed, and of course subscribe if you're new. Until next time, I'm the host, you're watching The Gray Medium. Stay gray.